Welcome back to Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catallo, where we find ourselves in the 4th episode of my design methodology series. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Steve Rost, who is not only an accomplished artist and photographer, but also a longtime friend and old soccer teammate. Now, for the listener, I've known Steve since probably 1998 when I started as a young architecture student at Lawrence Tech University. Although I never ironically had Steve as a professor, I instantly admired his photography work and certainly his approach to design, and therefore, we quickly became friends through the classroom, the basketball court, and certainly the soccer field. And in between, Steve was always a great sounding board for me as a student, giving great design advice on all aspects and mediums of design. Steve, thank you so much for offering your time to myself and the listeners. And by all means, please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. And it's such a great opportunity to hang out with you on this talk. We don't get a chance to see each other enough these days. But yes, as you mentioned, I was a professor at Lawrence Tech. And my time there spanned 40 years. So long before you became one of our students, I had established myself as somebody who not only was teaching, but also active, as you mentioned, on the basketball court and the soccer field, but also in the areas of architecture and design that were not in my particular wheelhouse. But to go back even a little further, just some background for your listeners and to give them a little sense of, my diverse thinking and learning style. As a young college kid back in the early 1970s, I went to school to study business and engineering. And so I chose mechanical engineering as that specific area of study and market research in the business school. And that was going to lead me towards a dual degree and then a master's in business administration. Midway through my learning cycle, I decided to drop the engineering part. Of course, I already suffered through calculus 1, 2, and 3. But as it turned out, it was a great decision and got my Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration in Market Research. Worked in the field for a couple years as a sales engineer. Hated it. Didn't think I was going to go anywhere. A lot of more pressure than I really cared for. And so I left that career path behind and did 180 degrees and became a bicycle mechanic. I had an interest in cycling, which I still do today, but it gave me a little respite to think about career paths and perhaps even further education, which then led to applications to design schools as again an undergraduate. So I already had my undergraduate degree, and was accepted to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design to study graphic design. While doing that, because I was a transfer student and had all sorts of credits transferred in from my undergraduate degree, I had credits to take, and so I became a dual degree major in photography and graphic design. And if that wasn't enough, I thought, well, what would be a great companion to those two career paths? Well, filmmaking. So I became a triple major at the undergraduate level in my mid-20s. Well, that was it was a great decision because that's where I met my then girlfriend and now wife in the film editing room. But it was a challenging decision because it was overwhelming content. So I decided I would get my portfolio together, apply to graduate schools, and that brings me to fast forward to Michigan. I was accepted to Cranbrook Academy of Art in both the graphic design department and in the photography department, which is a very rare opportunity. But again, going back to my previous undergraduate experience being in engineering and business, I didn't want to be pigeonholed, I suppose is one way to put it, but I also needed to feed my thirst for creative thinking in multiple levels, multiple ways. So I moved to Michigan in 1980 to get my master's in fine arts, had studios both in graphic design and in photography, had the opportunity to start teaching at a private high school and middle school called Roper, at that point, Roper City and Country School, and while I was still in grad school. And then a couple of years later, the opportunity to teach at Lawrence Tech part-time came up. And so I was teaching full-time at Roper, also women's varsity soccer coach and men's JV soccer coach, and also teaching at Lawrence Tech, primarily at night, on a Friday night, oddly enough. People wanted to take the photography class, and whether it was Friday night or Monday afternoon, the courses enrolled were full. And then that my mentor, Harold Linton, offered me a full-time position because enrollment was strong back in the early 80s, mid-80s. And 40 years later, I retired. So just 2 years ago, it was my 40th. After my 40th year of teaching, I decided to step away from that and concentrate on my art and design work, but mostly artwork. And so that's where I am today. I mean, there's lots. I taught foundation design to architects and designers. I was part of a group of faculty who started a fine arts program at a technological university, which is quite an accomplishment. It's an accredited program. It's an incredible program, and really proud of the advancements and in the degree programs that we offered, including master's degrees. I've developed and taught classes that are interdisciplinary, so working with biologists and physicists and computer engineers and biomedical engineers and folks from the College of Business Administration. Those are the relationships that I think kept me going as a faculty person at a technological university. And we can talk about the students all day long. They're great. They were motivating. They were a diverse group of people, tech nerds to artistic people who needed to find career paths that would make their families proud, and everything in between. So it was a great 40 years of teaching, still friends with a lot of the students I taught, including our host today. And though you did not take my class, though you were instrumental in one of the courses I taught when I needed support with hardware and software and kind of I believe it was a rendering software, 3D time-based rendering software, which I had no clue how to use, but your patience and knowledge made that project extremely successul and useful for the students that I was teaching. So if I haven't said thank you for that, I say thank you, Scott.
You're very welcome, and I actually probably forgot about it, but thank you. And I appreciate the background, Steve. You should be very, very proud of the program. When I get back, I'm always amazed the level of work that the students do produce. And as you all know, I bounce in and out of Lawrence Tech from time to time. If it's an event, and sometimes I just go because I miss the vibe of the studio. And I enjoy walking around to the studios and seeing the student work. Yeah, I mean, you've done a fantastic job with that program.
Yeah, it's great. It's a team effort. The faculty and administrators, terrific to work with. It helps that we have, all our programs are accredited, so we're kept responsible for the content and delivery methods and all of that. So,
and as long as I've known you, I didn't know that you and I both shared that we started out in engineering and didn't end up in engineering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But all good intentions, right?
Yep. Yeah. And in hindsight, as I mentioned, I didn't like my job, and I quit. But in hindsight, that was such an incredible experience, and it helped me relate to my colleagues over in the engineering school and the students who I talked to who were taking calculus and physics and all the other technical courses that were required. At least I can personally relate to, I don't know about the struggles is the right word, but the challenges of content that may not be a natural part, but a necessary part of the education. So,
Understood. And I've always had an appreciation, obviously, for engineering because that's where I started out. And it sounds like as did you, but I've always admired engineers as a whole because of the schooling that they go through. But also, they're in a very similar field, whether it's architecture or even art in general. They do the same thing. They approach a challenge. And maybe it's a different way than you and I would, given our mediums. But, they have a problem that they're trying to solve, and they just have a different approach. And I've always admired that approach.
Yeah. It amazes me that when a student will complete their program and get a job in their field of whether it's technical or creative and then become successful and leaders in their fields. It's very gratifying. And I think that partly is the content of the curriculum, but I think it's mostly the sense of confidence they get when they're going through a 4 or 5 or 6 year program, depending on what level of degrees that they're seeking, and the mentorship that faculty at Lawrence Tech provide. And I think that's not that this wants to be an advertisement for Lawrence Tech, but it is a pretty special place for students who are studying and are career path oriented, which they all should be. Agreed.
Yep. And we'll use that as a segue into the heart of the series and the interview, which is to talk about design. And, one of the, obviously the big questions I've been asking my guests in this series is your approach. You have a different medium than the other guests I've had, whether it was architecture, fashion, or furniture design. Can you walk the listener through your design process and what sort of methodology do you use to approach a design challenge?
Sure. I've been thinking about this for a while. Actually, I think about it every time I approach a design problem because each situation requires a different path, I believe. Some projects that I take on are more pragmatic and need to solve a problem that I have. So it could be a piece of furniture. It could be even trying to solve a problem that I didn't even know existed. Or there are those where I can, and this may sound cliche, but I look at some materials and say, okay, what is this material saying to me? I know I have a goal in mind to make something, to build something, to create something, but I might look at a sheet of metal and say, okay, I can roll this, I can slice it, I can weld it, I can shape it in whatever forms I want, and what will this lead me to? What's the end result? And it turns out to be the process of designing that will end up creating the final object. So some of this, and that really applies to the sculptures I'm making. I don't have a lot of experience, so it's an quote unquote on the job experience. If I'm trying to form some concrete and I have a leak, that's going to change the way that the object looks and perhaps extend the time frame in which to complete the project. And in that time frame, things, you look at it, you scratch your chin and rub your head, and you wonder what's next. But there are projects that I know I need to create something. So let's say I'm building a bookshelf. And one of the things that I did often was not just to look at its functionality, but also its aesthetic value. And some of that is material choices. Some of it is fit and finish. Some of it is the context in which the object is going to be placed. And those projects, you design, you draw, you measure, but then there's choices of how you're going to make connections and the scale of the project, the finished project. And all of that becomes steps in the process of designing.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that kind of resonated through the last 3 interviews, and it seemed to be sort of a common thread, is everybody kind of started with the approach of doing research ahead of anything that they were looking as a challenge. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the art and design world, sometimes research might interfere with the sense of originality. And I think it's project specific. When I was teaching, I was a strong proponent of research for my students. And I would also apply that in my own work so that I would teach by example. I'm going to say that research comes in many different forms. And looking at other people's work and seeing how other people have found the end game, the final project, the final product, but you never know what preceded that. I shouldn't say you never know, but it rarely is revealed in the final product as to what their approach to their final solution was. I'll often pick up a book and start reading, whether it's fiction or historic work, and maybe not even in the field by which I was looking at. So I could look. I'm reading a book by Jack Kerouac right now, a pretty famous book, On the Road, and that has nothing to do with my projects that I'm working on, but it gives me lots of visual reference, a lot of interpersonal relationships that he's created in his narrative in this book, On the Road. And I can take that information and reposition it. And one of the lifelong projects I've been working on over the years is image and sense of city or sense of place. It depends on the context. And so I'll be either writing about that or creating photographs or delivering papers at conferences based on that content. So the research for something like that isn't going to come out of just my head. It's going to come out of things that I've observed, but through all my senses. And so reading books, watching films, tasting food, imagining, a lot of imagination, imagining what sounds people walking in churches might sound like versus people walking past a fountain. And those senses, again, going back to the image and a sense of city, addressing all the five senses, that's where some of the research that I would work on comes from. I know that was kind of convoluted, but...
No, I think I appreciate that, because I think we're very aligned in that thought surrounding research. I've always felt that it is good to find out what other people are doing, and most importantly, why. But I've always found, at least in my sort of design walk, that life experience is worth way more to shape design thought than just going out and seeing what other people are doing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, when I look at somebody's architectural vision, whether it's a student or a professional, if I'm looking over their shoulders, I will ask those questions. I will ask, have you been to this place? Or not the place but just in general, a place that you're creating. Shopping malls, hospital hallways, shower rooms in high schools, those sort of things, and those kind of experiential moments, I think, for the designer is really important.
Agreed. And I think that leads into a nice segue into my next question.
Okay.
So you're in an interesting place where you're kind of on both sides of the fence. You're designing, but you're also critiquing and, creating students at the same time. So given that experience, how would you define good design, and what do you look for that interests you or you would consider good design?
Well, that's a pretty complex question.
Thank you.
and we have a couple hours to talk, so I think I can address that. Well, to me, good design is design that I can, from one definition, design that I can live with. Right? Good design is design that functions well, solves the problem. Good design is something that surprises you. Good design is something that you'll want to experience again and again and again. Good design builds memories. Good design, I think, is something you want to say, oh, I'm going to share this with somebody else. Good design is also something that communicates, and there's probably a better word for this, but communicates beyond its objectiveness, that speaks, that hits below the functionality, or beyond the functionality, not below, but below the surface. And I'm sure psychologists have words for these sort of things. And good design is efficient use of materials in many cases. Choosing the right materials. And was there another part to that question?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. and I'm going to throw you a curveball, because I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't ask the other guests, but I feel like it affects you more for some odd reason. And so I'm going to ask you, okay. What's your thought on the impact of AI in design as you're seeing it now? Now, taking the context out of, using it to help write things, but using it in the context of design as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll say that I've not used AI with the intent of using AI. I know when I ask Siri questions or I go into Google, that's a artificial intelligent interface, and often I'm disappointed in the response. I've seen, again, looking over the shoulders of students and some professionals, I've seen it in action. I think there is, and this is cliche, but incredible potential for that. But it, to me, takes a lot of fun and joy out of discovering things on your own. One of the pleasures I would get when I would walk into a library or a bookstore and even grocery stores. I would wander and I would wonder and I would arbitrarily start to choose books or cooking ingredients and assemble something that, whether it's a book that I'm reading, so even if it's a technical book or a book on poetry or psychology, it would be this random act of gathering that would eventually, whether it's immediate or pushed down the road, but it would have an impact on things that I think I know, things I do know, or things that might be applied to a totally different context. When it comes to ingredients for food, it could be an awful mess and taste terrible, so that's a little bit more risky. But in terms of artificial intelligence, that would be my take on that, in that it does limit some of the first-person experiences that I get a lot of joy out of. And going back to something I said earlier in terms of the design process, is that if you don't have that first-person experience, how do you know that you're going down the right path?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I share the wandering part that you have as well. I guess it's true. All those who wander are not lost, right?
Right. That road's going to take you somewhere.
Right. So one of the things that you said at the onset of the interview, you mentioned somebody's name, Harold Linton, who was actually my advisor when I became a student at Lawrence Tech. Yes. Fantastic guy. So staying on sort of that theme, you mentioned him as a bit of a mentor, but include Harold by all means. But are there others that have inspired you throughout your career? Who are those people? And I guess who's inspiring you, or what inspires you now as a designer?
Yeah, well, definitely Harold had an impact on my career in a very positive way. Both as an artist, because he was a prolific artist, as well as a dedicated teacher and cared dearly about the content of delivery. And so as a role model, that was like, it doesn't get much better than that. The person that I studied photography with, he passed away. He died about 3 years ago. He was a brilliant guy that could talk to you and care about what you were doing on many levels. And even I studied with him for 2 years. His name's Carl Toth. We became friends after those years, and I'm still very close to with his sons and his wife. And we're working on a archival project, trying to collect all the information we can about his career paths. But one of the things about his tutelage and his mentorship was, even though he was the artist in residence in photography, he had a broad interest in literature and sports and cars and science and space and all of those. And it wasn't just about his artwork wasn't about the image, but it was about the language of the image. And that kind of approach to art and design really changed my direction and my thinking about design. Design is not just about advertising. You use design principles in advertising, but it's also solving problems as opposed to creating problems. So Carl and Harold definitely were influences. And then I would say my wife, Andrea Ice, she's also in the same field, As I mentioned early on in this talk, I met her in undergraduate school. She had a degree in classics and archaeology, came to Minneapolis College of Art and Design with an undergraduate degree as I did. So we were older students amongst the undergraduates. But she was studying film and photography, and we were friends, and then we soon became a couple, and we both went to graduate school together, and her approach to art was very different than mine, but at the same time we shared the same mentor, Carl Toth, and so we had the same or a similar approach to thinking about art and design, sometimes or perhaps often disagreeing, but we always get it resolved. But yeah, Andrea, she worked really hard. She was a great professor at Oakland University, soon to retire, and a prolific reader and writer, and a great filmmaker, and somebody I admire as an artist and as a person. So.
Oh, that's great, Steve. I mean, having known you both for quite a while, you absolutely complement each other very, very well.
That's a polite way to put it.
Another question I'll ask you, and you probably have, again, probably the best perspective on this. What advice would you give somebody, a younger student or a young designer, that was going into any realm or field of design or coming into college? What sort of advice would you give them?
Oh, I do this all the time.
I know.
It's so important to avoid being myopic and to look at the world and career paths from a broad perspective, to not close doors and say, oh, I don't want to do this, but to be open and thoughtful about what it is that what you're learning and the potential of its application. And I really believe in that potential as opposed to the definitive part of things. And I would go back to in the photography classes that I taught. I know darn well that anybody who was going to take my photography class was not going to do a career in photography, but it was a means to direction of seeing and processing information and applying the principles of design from a personal perspective. And that's how I taught photography, and trying to make it personal way to express an idea. A couple of other components to ways I would advise people is, and I've said this earlier, is to have that first person experience. To drive to downtown Detroit and walk through the Guardian building, and rather than looking at pictures in the book, but to touch the tile. It looks different than it feels. It looks different on the pages of books than it feels when your hand is brushing against the glossy Pewabic tiles. To walk through the alleys of a neighborhood, as opposed to assuming they are just places of dropping junk in it or driving to your garage, but to actually walk it and get a sense of what the relationship of backyards are to each other. So that first person experience is really something, if it's possible, to experience. I'll finish this part up with read and write. And even if you're uncomfortable with writing, the more you write, the better you get. And have somebody edit the work that you're writing, because it helps you become a better communicator. Yeah, and AI is not going to do it for you.
I would say that's fantastic advice on all accounts, Steve. Good stuff. And the last question I'm going to ask you is, even though I have a sense of the answer, what is some of your favorite artists, musical artists, and what kind of songs are your favorite songs?
Oh, gee, what would stop
It's always
me
the hardest question for people.
Yeah, what will stop me from turning the channel, right? Sirius XM, and you've got everything from here to there and back again at your fingertips. So when I hear a song by the Kinks, I'll stop and listen, even if I've heard it a million times. They're great storytellers, musically engaging, sometimes inventive, sometimes conceptual, other times singing or writing about simple things of politics or love or relationships. I really admire the songwriting and the career paths that the Kinks did from the early 60s when I was a teenager to even today when Ray Davies has his own personal career. People ask me when I was shopping for a car, I was interested in what the sound system sounded like, and they asked me, so what kind of music do you listen to? Well, that was one of the most difficult questions anybody can ask me, because I like almost everything. I'll even give opera a try sometimes. Miles Davis is great to listen to because of the passion of how he controls or doesn't control the horn that he's playing. Leonard Bernstein's playfulness in compositions, Dave Brubeck and his inventiveness of timing, and the gathering of musicians that he had. I was just talking to my wife about Sun Ra, I think his birthday would have been recent. Just the challenge of listening to some of those compositions, and then imagining the impact that he had, or any of these historic composers and musicians had on people today. But even more recently, Jack White is great to listen to, even, and not to pick on Detroit artists, but Eminem drives me crazy, makes me cry when I listen to some of his older music. Just the pain that he puts into his music, whether it's autobiographical or just reflections of the society that he lived in and we all lived in or live in. Yeah, and then, that's the musical artists.
Well, very good. And I can't argue with any of that. Everything you mentioned is fantastic. Well, Steve, I can't thank you enough. I always love getting together with you and chatting, and you and I obviously will keep doing it no matter what. So I very much appreciate your time. And are there any last things you want to tell the listeners?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit to that first person experience. And while I was at Lawrence Tech, I did a significant amount of study abroad mentoring with students. So I've been essentially around the world with our Lawrence Tech students. And I hope that my mentorship had an impact on them, but certainly their experience, my observation of their experience really was enlightening and gave me a sense of hope and of the future when I saw students interacting with new experiences, new languages, new foods, and whether it was somebody refusing to eat food in China and was demanding to eat McDonald's, that was eye-opening, or those who were willing to try deep fried crickets. Which I would not, or I did not. So those kind of experiences were great and had such an impact on me, and gave me some great opportunities to make new friends in different countries with faculty, presidents of universities, architects, designers, even people on the streets who I would stop and ask for directions in a totally different language. was extremely eye-opening. And as a result of that experience, right before I retired, I initiated a endowed travel fellowship for the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Tech. And we met a threshold to create this endowed travel fellowship. And it doesn't need to be international travel at all. It could be travel to do any kind of research locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. It's up to them to make the proposal, but it's something that was very glad to be able to create, and hopefully it gets put to good use and expands other people's experiences as travel did for me and will continue for me.
Well, I know it will, and thank you so much, Steve, for your friendship through a lot of years, and certainly your insight for this episode.
Yeah, I hope it went well, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you, Steve.
Sure thing.
Thanks again, Steve, for your design methodology and your insight into photography, art, and certainly design mentoring. I appreciate your insight given a very diverse design background, which also includes teaching and mentoring throughout an impressive career. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank you for your friendship over these many years, as well as your design mentorship. So where do we go from here? Well, Steve laid out some interesting points and takeaways, such as be open to change. Your initial career path may not be where your journey ends. Each design challenge often requires a different path or approach each time. Sometimes the material directs your design path. Sometimes research can hinder sense of originality. Life experiences are paramount for design creativity. Now, I appreciate your continued support for Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catallo podcast. And if you're enjoying the content, please hit that little follow or subscribe button and tell your friends about this podcast, as you'll all want to catch my next episode in this series, which I not only summarize the series, but give you my own design methodology and philosophy. As a reminder, this podcast can always be heard on all your favorite podcast and music listening platforms. And keep those questions and show ideas coming at my podcast email, catelloscott@gmail.com. Now for the intro-outro music for this episode. Steve, I am, of course, a Kinks fan as well. And I could have picked many songs by them for this episode. But there's no doubt, having known you for so long, the obvious choice had to be a well-respected man. Which, of course, you are, my friend. Till next time.